Today, our message title is, There is One Judge, Don't Take His Seat. There is one judge. So if you've ever been in a courtroom before, some of you I know, maybe more times than others for different reasons, but if you've ever sat in a courtroom, I've been there a few times, and with the exception, of course, to like the Supreme Court and some others, but generally, there's one seat in a courtroom. And that person has all the authority in that room. If they tell you to be quiet, you be quiet. If they tell you to leave the room, you leave the room. And if you're on trial, if you've been guilty of something and you're going to find out the consequences of your actions, it's probably not a good idea to just go sit up in that person's chair and pretend to be them. Now, I've been part of some good court cases where some adoptions, and of course at the end the judge brings the little kids up, let them sit in their chair. But just think about the ridiculousness of that idea. I mean, how about when you're a kid, if you're in trouble, you know you were caught, and your parents come in to get you. What if you just started imitating your parents at that moment and just started? Doesn't go too well, does it? It's kind of silly. It's kind of ridiculous. And to imagine if you've murdered someone and you walk in and you have the audacity to go say, you know what, Judge, I think I can be a better judge of myself than you can. I'm going to sit in the seat. It's kind of silly, isn't it? But as we're going to see here, oftentimes that's what we do. We will try to place ourselves in the judgment seat in regards of looking at other people and the things in this world. We've been going through this series. We began in Luke, different parts, but we've gone through Luke chapter 6, and the beginning of this chapter began with Jesus giving hints to his divine nature, that he was the Lord of the Sabbath. We didn't go through that text, but that's, if you want to go through that yourself, there's this dialogue, and the Pharisees, they had these rules that you don't do any work at all on Sabbath. This is God's day. You don't do any work on God's day. And guess what? Jesus healed some people, and they ate some food. They gathered some wheat out of a field because they were hungry, and they rolled it in their hands. And the religious leaders they were so caught in their system that they were like, oh, that's work. You've defied it. And Jesus says the Lord's day is his day. That's quite a statement. He declared himself Lord of the Sabbath, that day that is dedicated to God. He's basically saying, it's my day. The authority of God was in Jesus. And so then he goes and he calls the 12, and the crowds begin to follow him. Jesus teaches his Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes and shows us a new way of living and responding to the world around us. His divine desire for humanity, his desire to heal the wholeness of who we are. And then Jesus begins to teach this next radical idea, as we went through a couple weeks past in verse 27. But to you who are willing to listen, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. Love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to be repaid. Then your reward from heaven will be very great, and you will truly be acting as children of the Most High. For he is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. And we talked about that. We are called to be voices of compassion, not voices of condemnation in this world. So today we continue on with what Jesus said after that, giving us a deeper and fuller understanding of why Jesus was saying what he was saying here. So our big idea this morning is this: there is only one judge in the courtroom. If you're guilty and on trial, kneel and ask for mercy. Don't try to sit in the judge's chair. If you're guilty and on trial, kneel and ask for mercy, and don't try to sit in the judge's chair. Anyone without sin here? Anyone not guilty? We've all been guilty. That's just what we saw right before that passage. The woman caught in adultery, and Jesus said, hey, they wanted to stone her. They wanted to condemn her. They wanted to sentence her to death. And Jesus said, okay, I will let you be the judge, jury, and executioner. The first person without sin, the first person who's innocent, you can be the judge. And one by one, starting with the oldest to the youngest, their stones dropped. And there was only one person who remained who was innocent. There was only one person qualified to pick up a stone and kill this woman. And it was Jesus, and he said, I came not to condemn, but I came to give life. Go and sin no more. So he continues on, verse 37, do not judge others, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn others. The word condemn, it's like to put a consequence, to make a declaration of them. Do not condemn others, or it will come back against you. I think we can see a picture there. Imagine you're in a courtroom and everyone just knows. They're just like, oh, I'm sure this person did it. I'm just sure they're guilty. And you're sitting there and you're like, sentence them to death. You're sentenced to death. And you're yelling at the person who is guilty and you're saying, you're going to die. And then the judge stands up and says, I'm showing you mercy. We are playing a fool's part when we think we can be the ones to cast judgment. He goes on to say, forgive others, and you will be forgiven. Give, and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together, to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. Now, if you're like me, if you grew up in church your whole life, you heard that passage a little out of context, in the context of like giving financially to the church. It's a great idea, but this context for this verse is about mercy, about grace and forgiveness. That gift of mercy. How many of you know that mercy is a gift? It's not because we deserve it. God gave us a gift we do not deserve, and therefore we are also to extend the gift to others, whether or not they deserve it. Because in reality, none of us deserve it. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together, to make room for more. I love this idea. How many of you have had those moments in your life like, man, God, I hope there's room for more mercy because I just keep struggling. I just can't seem to get it right yet. And we see this picture. He's like, yes, just extend mercy to others. Just keep doing what I'm calling you to do. I am making more room for more mercy. I'm making more room for more of me, for more of my gift within you. I'm so glad. I mean, think about it. If we are finite beings and God is all, how can we possibly get all of Him within us? We can't. He says, so I'm going to make more room inside you. As we walk in faithfulness, as we walk in obedience to Him, He is pressing down. He is making more room. There's an infinite amount of room He's going to make within us for Himself, for His mercy and His purposes to overflow out of us. Till it's overflowing. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. Jesus is saying here is we are not to try and sit in His chair. We are not Lord of the Sabbath. He is. Last week we talked about clinging to Jesus and allowing Him to pull us out of sin. And that story of the woman that He didn't condemn, but there's still that calling. He was calling her to cling to Him, to lead her out of her situation. He said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Imagine you're in a courtroom and everyone's on trial for the same crimes and someone's pointing out and saying, yeah, they did this, they deserve that. But you're all part of the same crime. And so when we condemn others, we're all part of the crime of sin, of rebellion against God. And there is none righteous, no, not one. So when we accuse, when we condemn others, we are accusing and condemning ourselves because we're all part of the same crime. Given, it will be given. The amount you give is what will be given to you. Now, that verse can be taken sometimes to an extreme, and it's not saying that we are to stop discerning between what is good, what God has said and is life-giving and what isn't. It doesn't mean I can just do whatever I want. We've all seen those memes, and so like, only God can judge me. I can do what I want. Well, that should scare you because God, okay? There doesn't mean there won't be judgment. And we'll look at that. It doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. In fact, Jesus said, I'm come to save you from yourself. I've come to save you from your sin. I've come to save you from the consequences of your sin. That's why he said, go and sin no more. And he's giving us that opportunity over and over again to come in line with his will, to come in line with his direction, to come in line with the things that he's called us to. And he gives us that grace and that mercy because he knows we will fail. He knows we can't do it on our own. He gives us his Spirit to guide and direct us, to strengthen us, to begin to shape us into who he is. But we're not in a position to determine who should or shouldn't receive God's mercy. We aren't in a position to determine who should or shouldn't receive our love and our care, because he already just said, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. So he gave them this big lofty idea, and now he's pouring it out and saying, you can't, because I imagine as soon as Jesus said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, I guarantee you, because these were real people just like us, they automatically started seeing people that they were struggling with, like, God, I don't want to do that. God, you surely couldn't mean so-and-so. You surely couldn't mean that person. They're the worst of the worst. And in that moment when we start saying, God, yeah, but you surely couldn't, and we talk about the Christians that have big butts, and we start finding ourselves saying, yeah, but to God, in those moments when we're saying, yeah, but what's happening is we're saying, yeah, but God, I'm the better judge. Scoot over. Let me sit in your chair. We aren't to condemn, to determine and sentence people to an eternal punishment, because we have been deserving of the same. But we are in a position to offer mercy to others because that is what God has done for us. That's what he's given us. What God gives us, he says, give freely, share freely with others. And so he's given us his love. He's given us his mercy. And it's overflowing out of us. We don't have to worry about it running out. In fact, the more of it we get away, he says, I'm going to press down. I'm going to make even more room. I'm going to give you more capacity. Because we are not called to extend condemnation. We are called to extend compassion. John chapter 3, verse 16 through 19. For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. Verse 18, there is no judgment against anyone who believes in him. But anyone who does not believe in him has already been judged for not believing in God's one and only Son. And the judgment is based on this fact. God's light came into the world, but people loved the darkness more than the light, for their actions were evil. See, people are stuck in darkness. And in the darkness, there lies their judgment. They are apart from God. We aren't to judge people who are already stuck in judgment. We are to be shining the light so that they can come out of that judgment, so that they can come into mercy, so that they can see the light of Christ that has come into this world. Jesus came to save people, not condemn them, which means, in fact, that there, as we said, there is judgment. There is judgment. A ruling of guilty has already been handed down. Already, those outside of God's grace, there is death. Outside of Christ, there is life, or there is death. Think about it. If God created everything, And in and through him, there isn't anything that wasn't made. To be with God, to be in his presence, there is light. There is life. And if we are to be cut off, if we are to be separated from that, there is nothing but death and darkness and chaos and destruction. There has already been a guilty verdict laid down upon all of humanity. And Jesus is sitting there saying, I am mercy, come to me. And so our job in this world isn't to go to people and say, you're condemned, you're condemned. Our job is to say, come to mercy. Because in reality, sometimes we don't want to see everyone come to mercy, do we? We want to see them reap the consequences that we all probably deserve. But upon that guilty verdict that is upon all of humanity, God, the only judge, stepped down out of his seat to take our place on the cross in the form of Jesus, his Son. Because only the innocent could take the place of the guilty. And if God, who is innocent, who extended his love and mercy to us who didn't deserve it, how much more so should we be willing to offer it to others? We are called by Jesus to lay down our execution stones and join him in inviting others to his compassion and mercy. We are to live out within our lives what Christ accomplished on the cross. The work that Christ did on the cross, we get to live out. What he accomplished in death, we get to reap the rewards of in this life. Verse 39. Then Jesus gave the following illustration. Can one blind person lead another? Won't they both fall into a ditch? Students are not greater than their teacher, but the student who is fully trained will become like the teacher. And that was in line with our whole image of this series that we're doing, that we're to be disciples, students of Christ. We're to be learning from him, modeling, imitating him in all that we do. And he was saying that there. He's saying, I'm your rabbi, I'm your teacher, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Do you think you are greater than I? We are to be following him and inviting others to follow him. He is the light of the world. We see this picture of a blind person can't give directions to another blind person. In the same way, a guilty person can't condemn another guilty person. Jesus is our teacher. We are to become like him, he who showed mercy. Verse 41, and he goes on to say, well, why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying, friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. We see this picture, and all of us had something, irritation, something in our eye before. And especially in that culture, you're outside, you got sand and grit and dirt, and you'd have things in your eyes quite a bit. If you've worked on a farm or done hay, you always had something in your eye. And you get this picture of sometimes you have to have someone else help get it out. And when Jesus was talking earlier about humility and just the need to be humble, he's showing us the heart here. We need to have such a heart of humility that we realize that we need to be worrying about ourselves and how we're responding to the world more than we're worried about someone else. And it's not saying other people don't have specks in their eyes. It doesn't mean other people don't have issues. They do. But when we think that their issues are different or worse than our issues, at that moment we have got, and to use this illustration of like a log, you have this solid log in your eye. Can you see it all with a log? So if we are thinking that we are judges, if we are thinking we are better than everyone else, then we have completely been spiritually blinded. And he's saying, have that humility that I am not better than anyone else. And I need God's mercy as much as anyone. And so that changes. So when we come to someone who's maybe struggling with a sin or an attitude, something that's possibly going to ruin their life. Now, it's not love to just leave them going in that direction. But there's a couple ways we can approach that. We can come as a judge and condemn and say, you are horrible, you piece of garbage, stop it. Probably not going to respond too well. Or we could come say, hey, I love you. And I get it. Life is difficult. Man, I've got some stuff that I'm probably not the one to say anything. I've got things in my own life. Feel free to call me on it. But for right now, you're walking into darkness. I see calamity. I see this going on. But man, I want you to experience what God has done for me. You don't know my story. I don't deserve what's in my life right now because of this. And what if we shared our own testimony? I think we forget that. We forget our testimony. We forget our own rap sheet. We forget why we were in the courtroom to begin with. And it's so easy. We get set free. We're like, I'm innocent. No, we're not innocent. We're shown mercy. And because of that, to go to other people and just be willing, but go to them in love and say, man, I'm not even going to, and we have to be so careful. It's so easy sometimes to go like, you're going to hell. You know what? Maybe not. There's going to be people in heaven who made some really bad decisions as Christians. There's people with really wonderful, humble hearts that are destroying their lives right now. And so they don't need someone to come and hit them with a rock or put a noose around their neck. Instead, they need someone to come along them and pick them up and say, hey, the prison cell is open. You've been set free. You are free. See, Christ has set us free. So our job isn't to kick people into the darkness. Our job is to pull them into the light. Then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. And because this whole not judging, it doesn't mean we're not supposed to help people. It doesn't mean we're not supposed to speak truth in love. But what it means is we have to be so careful that we are doing it in the right heart and the right attitude, that we are showing compassion. See, compassion compels me to go down with someone in their situation to help pull them out. Condemnation says, yeah, you deserve to be where you got right now. And it's easy to slip into that. It's easy I'm as guilty as anyone. I love one of those videos where the bully's, picking on the little guy and the little guy just smashes him, or someone just robs someone and they run into a sign. And we all love that. We all love to see someone get what's due. Let's be honest. But to guard our hearts, and probably one of the most challenging things that God hit me on, and just an example of this would be 9/11. We just remembered that last month. And like everyone else, I was angry, upset. And I'm not saying there doesn't need to be a response to evil, and governments and systems have a responsibility, but as believers, to guard our hearts. Because there was a moment where, and I have acquaintances and people that were training and were part of trying to seek and make sure justice was done. But there was a point when Osama bin Laden was killed. And I'm not saying he shouldn't or shouldn't have been. That's beside the point. The reality was I saw all of a sudden people cheering and so excited. And my initial response was like, we got him, and then God just hit me, and I just became like, no. We should be weeping. Whether it needed to happen or not is a moot point. This is someone who needed Christ. This is someone who died not knowing him. This is someone who died in darkness. We should weep and cry, not celebrate when people fall into judgment. The condition of our hearts. That's what Jesus said. He's wanting to heal all of us. That we don't celebrate when our enemies fall, but because we love them, we want to see compassion. We want to see them restored. We want to see them like become like the Pauls, where they have a complete turning and coming to Christ. God himself said, I desire that none should perish. Therefore, we should not desire that any should perish. We need to always be examining our hearts and motives before we begin to help others examine theirs. We need to always be examining our own hearts and motives before we dare begin to help others examine theirs. I need to be worried about my own obedience and my own need for God's mercy. I need to ask God to correct my heart and attitudes before I come alongside and ask God to help someone with theirs. Like the Pharisees, we can often do an amazing job of overcomplicating life and faith and creating systems and conspiracies and how we need to bring about God's kingdom in this world. Things that have nothing to do with God's kingdom and his plans to heal and restore the brokenhearted and set people free from sin and death. We need to be so careful that we aren't like the Pharisees we see standing on the outside that are saying, yes, but God this, yes, but God that. So Jesus shares this, and then he gives kind of a tool for knowing when we might be trying to judge others, when we might be trying to sit in his chair. And the ironic part is this next part, this text often gets used to judge other people. This next part often gets used to determine the bad fruit from the good fruit. But the reality is he's using this so we can examine the fruit of our own heart. He goes on to say, verse 43, a good tree can't produce bad fruit. A bad tree can't produce good fruit. A tree is identified by its fruit. Figs are never gathered from thorn bushes, and grapes are not picked from bramble bushes. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart. See, this wasn't about other people. This is about speaking to us directly. That the fruit, the words that come out of our mouth, is there mercy flowing out of us, or is there condemnation flowing out of us? If there's mercy flowing out of us, that is Christ, and Christ is good. He's the only one that is good. There was only one who was good, right? Christ. There was only one that was good. And so when Christ flows out of us, there is good fruit coming out of us. From a heart full of Jesus will flow life-giving words of mercy and forgiveness. And from a heart full of pharisaical pride and judgment will flow words of condemnation and death. There is one judge, it's Jesus. And we will all give an account to him and no one else for what we did with the life and mercy he has given us. And Jesus gave, just in wrapping up this morning, there's this parable in Matthew chapter 18, verse 21 through 35. And Jesus' own disciples, they struggled with this. Peter's like, God, how many times do I forgive someone? Lord, how often should I, verse 21, then Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? Like, is there a limit here? Because I've had it with so-and-so. Verse 22, Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Peter's like, what? I'm going to have to carry a tally. I'm going to have to carry a Excel spreadsheet or something for this. Jesus replied, 70 times 7. What Jesus was saying there in that imagery of that representation of that number, 70 times 7, he's basically saying, you don't stop forgiving, Peter. You don't stop. And Jesus said, therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors who owed him millions of dollars, he couldn't pay. So his master ordered that he be sold along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned to pay the debt. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me and I will pay it all. Then his master was filled with pity for him and he released him and forgave his debt. So this guy comes in, he owes the king, the ruler, millions of dollars. He can't pay it back. He pleads for mercy. The king shows him mercy, cancels out his millions of debt. But verse 28, but when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He went to a fellow guilty party, fellow servant, who owed him a few $1,000s. So he owed millions. This guy owes him only a few thousand. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Be patient with me and I will pay it, he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. Man, we do that sometimes with other people. Maybe we don't put them in a real prison. I'm not saying there's consequences. Certain things require real incarceration. But we'll put people in these emotional jails, and we hold them there until we think somehow they deserve for us to let them out. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called in the man he had forgiven and said, you evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you? Then the very angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. There is only one judge in the courtroom. If you're guilty and on trial, kneel and ask for mercy. Don't try to sit in the judge's chair.